So yeah, thank you everybody for joining this morning. Yeah, and thank you, Lisa, for the introduction. I'm Luke Waddington, so I'm a project officer in the climate environment team at South Cambridgeshire District Council. Our team sort of looks at a number of different climate change and carbon reduction projects. So it's quite a wide-ranging area of work. But one area that we're looking at is electric vehicles or EVs, and how we as a council, I suppose, can support our residents and our sort of communities in that transition to electric vehicles and zero emissions vehicles. So this presentation is going to be sort of a little bit about a bit of background, introducing electric vehicles and some of the kind of fundamentals. Some of you may already be aware of these, some of you may not, but I thought it's probably worthwhile to kind of introduce the sort of the basics. We'll then look at a bit around the sort of what the demand for EVs and EV chargers is like, what some of the benefits of having EV chargers in community buildings might be, and then we'll go on to talk about some of the grants available, including our own sort of charge point grant. We'll look at a case study of a village hall that's recently kind of made use of the grant and installed a charger, and then look at some of the sort of bit more detail really about operating models, kind of where to start and what to do next if you're interested. So I will just move on to a bit of the background and context. So as I'm sure you're probably aware, that the sort of main driver really for the uptake of electric vehicles is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel use, basically using petrol and diesel to power our vehicles that contribute towards climate change. So the UK government had announced the ending of sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030 in an effort to meet its own emissions reduction targets. This has recently been put back to 2035, as you might well have heard. But really, there's still that kind of urgency from a sort of a global climate change point of view, at least, to try and move ourselves away from petrol and diesel. Last year as well, the government introduced its own electric vehicle infrastructure strategy, which sets its vision for the sort of EV charger network and how that will work, but particularly around public charging and for people that might not have space to charge at home. And so now really electric vehicles are widely kind of recognised as part of our transition to decarbonising our transport nationally. Sales of new electric vehicles have increased over the last few years. In 2022, new registrations of electric vehicles accounted for, I think, about 22% of the market share, which was a record at that point. Obviously, electric vehicles aren't the only solution, and they're not, to reduce our emissions, but they are a key part of it. And they also have other benefits as well, as you can see there, in terms of the sort of air quality, reducing noise levels, and then, potentially economic opportunities around not only manufacturing, but sort of recycling, battery recycling, and indirect sort of opportunities around, locations where EV charging is taking place might benefit other businesses in those areas, might benefit whilst people are, charging up their vehicles. So there's sort of a host of reasons that we might want to be, interested in promoting electric vehicles and EV charging. So there's a few different sort of types of electric vehicles. I don't think it's worth sort of going into too much detail on these, but it's just worth mentioning that you've got the sort of two main types there. Are your pure battery electric vehicles on the left, so they're just powered by just by a battery. They tend to have a decent amount of range nowadays. They tend to be up to sort of 300 miles for the larger ones. And then you've got the plug-in hybrids on the other side, and these run from a battery, usually a smaller battery, until that then runs out, and then they have a internal combustion engine that then kicks in. And as I say, they tend to be sort of shorter ranged vehicles, but they do have a good sort of, I suppose they fill a useful niche. And 20 to 50 miles isn't too bad. That's often, most people sort of commute for the day is done in that sort of range. So they do have a place. But I think, when I refer to EVs, generally I'm referring to battery electric vehicles that are 100% electric. So EV chargers themselves. So there's a few different categories of these. The terminology that's used isn't the most helpful. I think it's just the way it seems to have evolved, sort of as these things have kind of come about. So you've got sort of four main categories there. and they're defined by their speed, as you can see there. So the sort of slow, fast, rapid, and ultra rapid. And that speed is dictated by the power, so which is measured in kilowatts. So as you can see there, the slow ones are sort of 3 to 5 kilowatts, and then that gets increasingly higher as you go towards the kind of rapids and ultra rapid chargers. The 3 kilowatt chargers are usually the ones that you see if you've sort of been around in London. They're often in lamp posts. They're quite slow. They're also tend to be the speed of home chargers as well. So you can have those at home and charge overnight. They don't need to be too fast. And then your fast chargers, they tend to be 7 to 22 kilowatts. They're the most common type of charger, I would say, probably. And they're the ones you'll often see, at, say, supermarket car parks or public car parks. I think that one there's a National Trust car park in the picture. So yeah, those sorts of places that you could expect to stay for, 2-3 hours or so, and get a decent amount of charge. And then your rapid and ultra rapid chargers tend to really be ones at motorway services and big charging hubs where you really want to, you're perhaps on a long journey and you just want to get on with it, charge up as quickly as you can and get back on the road again. So they're much more powerful, and they demand a lot more, a lot more energy, and so they're much more expensive to install. And so yeah, they tend to be in the kind of bigger service stations. But the ones we're sort of focusing on today really is that kind of fast bracket, that 7 to 22 kilowatt chargers that are good to sort of charge you up. You can get a good amount of charge from those in 3 hours or so. So just moving on to speeds, actually, this is quite a useful little graphic. It's fairly simple, but I think it's useful to illustrate the point again, really. So as you can see there, we've got the main kind of classifications that we just saw in the previous slide. The exact speeds are often dependent, the exact speeds of charging, are often dependent on your car's battery capacity. But as I say, this gives a good sort of general picture. So those slow chargers, they can even be just charging at home from your own supply with like a 3-pin plug. They take the longest, potentially all day, certainly, probably all night to charge. And then you've got the fast category in the middle. The majority of these are as sort of public chargers, as I said. And again, depending on your car, they can get you fully charged in 6 hours. It could be a bit longer, depending, as I say, on your vehicle. So whilst you work, or if you've got chargers at work, or it could still equate to a decent top-up charge if you're out shopping or at the gym or something like that. So that's what, as I say, what we're kind of looking at really in the context of village halls and community buildings, where people at least might be there for an hour or so to get a top-up charge, or potentially longer if there's an event on, or they're visiting friends in the area, something like that. And they're a good balance of sort of speed, cost, and power demand as well. And then obviously in the last kind of bar there, we've got the rapid and ultra rapid chargers that we just mentioned, where you're kind of getting up to a full charge potentially in 30 minutes or less. But really the sort of size of the connection that they require means it won't really be practical to install those at the sort of buildings that we're going to be talking about, in our sort of village halls, in our community centres, those sorts of buildings. It's really those 7 to 22 kilowatt ones that we're talking about. So I just thought it would be useful to kind of explain, how it actually works once you find a charger or once you've got one installed. So really, from a user's point of view, if you've got an electric vehicle, you can locate your charge point. Either I think that most cars can help you do this through sort of sat nav, or there's quite a few apps out and about with maps that show you your nearest kind of operational charge point. So you find your charger. Once you reached it, they tend to have a code or something like that you can scan with your mobile phone and download an app. You then have to put your details into the app, which registers you, and then you can basically begin charging once you're registered. And then once you're finished and you unplug, it will then take payment from the bank account that you've linked to through the app. So that's a sort of way it generally works at the moment. It can be a bit cumbersome because you probably end up with several different apps on your phone for different chargers that are run potentially by different companies in your area, or ones that you use regularly. So it's not the most streamlined way of doing things, but again, it seems to be the way that the sort of market has evolved, with lots of different apps and different companies obviously wanting you to use their app. However, one useful thing that has emerged fairly recently is contactless payment on EV chargers. So this is quite common on the big rapid chargers at motorway services, but hopefully it'll become more common on the sort of the more public chargers that we'll find in car parks and things like that. Because obviously then you can just pay contactless like you would anything else. You just tap your card basically, and it works. You don't have to go through the rigmarole of finding the app and installing it and putting in your details. So yeah, hopefully that'll emerge and kind of become more prevalent. I think it does cost more, for the operators to install these contactless modules and run them. So I guess that's probably why it hasn't quite caught on massively yet. But yeah, hopefully it will, because it'll make it a lot easier from the user experience. So that was the sort of fundamentals on kind of how it works, which is hopefully useful. But I just wanted to kind of zoom in a little bit more on us in South Cambridgeshire for some of the context of around kind of EV charging in our area, particularly, rather than just sort of nationally. So on the slide there, you can see there's some kind of key figures that relate to the share of emissions caused by transport, and particularly road traffic in our district. And obviously, as you can see, it's pretty sizable. So as you might know, South Cambs District Council has aspired to reach a 50% reduction in carbon emissions in the district by 2030, and then to reach net zero carbon by 2050. So given that sort of how much of our emissions in the district are sort of produced by road traffic, it's important that we really look at how we can reduce that if we're to get our overall emissions down. And part of this, as I said, is supporting the switch to electric vehicles alongside other activities, like active travel, behavioural change, and improved public transport. However, sort of not all of those things are really within our power as a district council, at least. So we aren't the Highways Authority. So we have limited kind of powers, I suppose, in terms of what goes on sort of on and in our roads. However, as a council, as an authority, we do definitely have a role to play in kind of encouraging where we can and enabling people where possible to sort of sort of uptake electric vehicles and make that transition. And there's obviously going to be a good amount of demand, being a fairly rural district as we are. We're still going to see a fairly large amount of sort of reliance on private motor vehicles, I would have said, even if and hopefully even if with improved public transport, there will still be that need for private motor vehicles. And this is an interesting graphic here that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority produced, which sort of forecasts demand for charge points. And they published this, I think it was last year, as part of their alternative fuel strategy. And so these kind of three categories that you can see here, so the en route and destination charges there in the red and green, respectively. Those sort of the en route is sort of those big rapid charges that we're talking about on the main motorway services. Destination charging, they're sort of looking at is what they're referring to there is charges that are generally in car parks, like we mentioned earlier, say at gyms or public car parks, where there's going to be a fairly certain demand. People are always going to be using those car parks, and so they'll want somewhere to charge their car. And so the demand for those areas is, for charging in those areas is quite high, and therefore it tends to be dealt with by the private sector. It's obviously viable for them to come in and put in a charger. They know that they're going to get users, and they're happy to do that. However, the area that sort of sees that probably still has a good amount of demand, as you can see there, that's still increasing over the years, is this public residential section at the bottom. And really, that's kind of people that aren't able to charge at home. Many people are. They have driveways, etc. But there's still a sizable minority of homes, even in our district, without access to private parking, who will need to charge either in the public sort of realm or on street or in charging hubs. I think there's around 25% of homes in South Cambridgeshire that don't have access to their own private parking. So that's still a fairly fairly decent sized chunk of people who potentially might be left behind. So there's also visitors as well, as visitors to the area who'll need chargers for top ups and passing through. Visiting friends and family who might not have a charger themselves. So this sort of public residential sector is an area of demand that I think the government are sort of keen to be satisfied, to see satisfied. And I think that the point I'm trying to make here is community charges can fulfil both of these roles, I think, or all of these roles, depending on where they are. They can charge provide a charging service for local residents who might not have their own driveways to charge on, but also for visitors, visitors to our area, people passing through, or indeed, people using the local amenities that we already have, like our leisure set, our village halls, whatever else it might be, recreation grounds, those sorts of things, our local shops. So yeah, they're kind of filling in quite a useful niche, I think, having community charges that can cover quite a lot of these different bases. So I think I've probably covered some of the benefits of community EV chargers already there in the previous slide, but I think, yeah, specifically kind of our community buildings, our village halls are good places for EV charging for a number of reasons, really. As you can see there, firstly, they sort of attract visitors. If you've got a charger that's registered on one of these maps, they'll come to find the charger. People will come and charge up, but whilst they're in the area, they might well do other things, use the local facilities. They can also support existing amenities, as I said, particularly where they're in walking distance. I think also, if they're visible, or if you've got signs up saying that they're there, it gives people that kind of confidence that the network of EV chargers is expanding, and can encourage people locally to take the plunge, and perhaps get an electric vehicle for their next car if they know that they've got a charger in the village. As I said, it also supports residents without parking. As we've seen, it's a good chunk of the area as a whole, as we're quite a rural area. We have about a quarter of homes in this situation of people that can't sort of charge at home. And obviously, it obviously supports the transition to net zero carbon emissions and boosts your sort of green credentials as an organisation. And also it can link to other renewable energy sort of infrastructure that you might already have, or that you might be planning, like solar panels, for instance. So that image there on the slide, I think it's from a village called Ingram, so I think that's in Northumberland. So not exactly a local example, I'm afraid, but it does. Yeah, they've obviously done the same. Basically, they've linked up their EV sort of. I think they've got a battery and also solar panels, and that's sort of powering their EV charger. So it can be quite a sort of a harmonious setup if you've kind of got those facilities or planning to have them in the future. So what's sort of being done really to encourage installations in community buildings? So from us at South Cams, we've got a EV charge point grant, should I say? And so what this offers, I'll go into a bit more detail about it later, and I'll share the link to the webpage after as well, which you can have a look at sort of a bit more information about the grant. But essentially, it funds up to £5,000 per project for capital costs. So that's purchase and installation of a charger essentially, and any other work that might involve groundwork potentially and electricity connections, all that sort of thing. Your village halls, community buildings, community centres, all those sorts of buildings, basically sort of public community buildings, are all eligible. We do ask that it's accessible where possible 24/7 for public use. Appreciate that isn't always the case. I've done this presentation before, and we've had village halls that have had to, for various reasons, perhaps have barriers at night. So that's absolutely fine, I think, as long as it's accessible for public use, the majority of the time, and certainly in the daytime, then that's a sort of a kind of a big thing, really, because obviously you want it to be used as much as possible. The other sort of key point to mention is an application must show that there's a sort of demand for the charger. So, what we were talking about earlier around, are there houses nearby that don't have their own parking that could benefit from a charger? Are there shops and facilities nearby, or within the hall itself that also kind of might complement having an EV charger? So it's about looking at where the demand's coming from and whether there's a likely sort of use case for the charger, really. So they're the kind of key aspects really of the sort of the grant and what we kind of look for, I suppose, in an application. We've tried to keep the application form pretty straightforward. If any of you have come across our Zero Carbon Communities grant, then that's it's sort of simpler than that, I would say. It's fairly brief. I think it's about 4 or 5 sections on the application form. One thing we would also advise as well is just getting quotes as well from installers to put into the application form, just because it gives us an idea of, you've had a sort of a look and basically to see what kind of costs, what the likely costs are. I'll go into a bit more detail around those costs in a minute and sort of, what you can expect to pay. But I think £5,000 per project is a sort of decent amount. It's a decent chunk towards the sort of installation of a charge point. I'll also put my email address as well at the end of the slides in case any of you got any particular questions that I can't answer today or that come to you later. Then obviously by all means ask, and I'm more than happy to set up separate calls with anybody if you want to pursue it further, or once you've had a chat to the people that you need to talk to, then yeah, more than happy to sort of have follow-up calls and kind of go into a bit more detail and hopefully help you if you're interested in applying to the grant. So we've had a couple of applications, well, we've had a few applications to the grant, to be fair, but Steeple Morden Parish Council are the most sort of advanced, I guess, or the furthest forward. So they have installed their charger, which you can see there on their sort of shiny new parking spaces just next to their hall, which you can just see with the green door kind of behind that tree. So yeah, Steeple Morden applied to the grant and got £3,500 towards installation and the installation of their chargers and improving their car parking bays and marking them out nicely for electric vehicles. I think before they just sort of had a gravelly kind of patch that was fine, but it wasn't quite as attractive as it could be. So yeah, that sort of helped them to make it a more formal kind of EV charging area, really. They also applied to the government for some funding. So there's a government grant scheme called the On-Street Residential Charge Point Scheme, which I'll come on to in the next slide, which they applied to, and also used some of their own parish council reserves as well to pay for the project. And as you can see there, it's sort of working. There's so people plugging in and charging. I'm just going to also say that they also provided some good supporting information as part of the application. So on the other side of the screen, you can see a map that they produced to sort of support their I suppose their business case, if you like. So the hall's there out on the sort of the edge of the village where that red star is. But what they identified in their application was all the houses in the village without any parking. So all those numbers sort of basically identify an individual house or a terrace or a pair of houses without parking. So they're all in walking distance within about 10 minutes walk of the village hall. So what that really helped us to see was, yes, there's a good chance of a demand for this charger. If these people, for instance, want to buy an electric vehicle but don't have anywhere to charge themselves, then at least they know that they've got somewhere that they can charge at the village hall within, a reasonable distance. So that was a really good example of that kind of demonstration that there'd be some demand. There's also, it probably isn't shown on the map, but there's within pretty close, there's a school just to the south. There's also a public house and a shop as well, I think, within walking distance. So again, kind of a handful of, and obviously the village hall itself with a recreation ground, I think should of course mention. So there's quite a lot of kind of facilities nearby that could complement the charger whilst people are going about their business or doing things with in those facilities. They can at least charge up for an hour and a couple of hours whilst they're kind of going about their day. It's not always easy and plain sailing, I would say, in terms of getting a charger installed. It's obviously fairly new technology, and I think that's true for installers as well. They're obviously still learning as much as we all are about electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. But I think Steeple Morden, I would hope found it worth it, and it did also have a couple of other benefits that were sort of on top of the EV charger itself. So the charger needed internet access so that it could connect to the car, and so they needed to improve the internet access at the site. But what that now means is their whole sort of recreation ground site now has free Wi-Fi access across the whole area for residents, and also they Steeple Morden Parish Council I think reapplied for or regained their general power of competence certificate, which was required to actually sort of charge users of the electric vehicle charger for their use. and that's another kind of string for to the bow of the parish council and the clerk as well. So yeah, I think it's been a fairly successful one for Steeple Morden. They were our first applicant. So yeah, I think they're well advanced, and they're obviously, as I say, kind of out the other side. They've done the installation and are now charging cars. So I mentioned in that slide that Steeple Morden had applied to the on-street residential charge point scheme. So this is a government grant that sort of can be applied for as well as our grant. It's called the on-street residential charge point scheme. So, but they have changed. That was when it first came out, and it was just for on-street charging several years ago. But the government have now relaxed it, and it's now for basically car parks, community-owned, local authority-owned, as it says there. It can fund up to 60% of your project's capital costs. It runs until March 2024. I don't know whether they are sort of going to continue it after that. As I say, the projects are complete by March 2024. Sorry, so it's obviously fairly tight. But applications are still open until that point, I would imagine. But I don't know if they're going to continue it into the following year. As yet, I haven't heard. And again, like our application, like our grant, sorry, they ask for sort of a demonstration of the demand for EV chargers as well. So I thought it would also be helpful to kind of look at a little bit more about different operating models for community chargers and how you might sort of, once you've got one installed, how it might work, how it might sort of run, basically. So there's two main operating models that I've kind of, as far as I can see at least. The first one is probably the most kind of common one, I would say, for kind of community chargers, is probably the own and operate model, as I call it. So as you sort of probably guessed, in this model, you yourselves as a organisation would purchase a charger, procure an installer to install that charger, and then once it's installed, you would then sort of take ownership of it. It would need a what's called a back office, so basically a system that runs the charger and takes payment, manages the maintenance, reports any faults to the manufacturer, those sorts of things. Some charger operators will provide a charger, a back office system, and have an approved installer as well that will come and install it for you. Others will just provide some of these services, but not all. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. But as I say, in this model, you own the charger and responsible for the sort of ongoing costs of it, including, as I say, that back office software, any kind of maintenance. Potentially, you can have a maintenance package as well, which is sometimes offered by charger manufacturers. There often is also a transaction processing fee as well that can be between 5 and 10% of a transaction. And you might also need a SIM card subscription as well to connect to the 4G network if there isn't broadband or Wi-Fi at the location. So there's quite a lot of, the responsibility is more in terms of this model, but what it does give you is more flexibility and control in choice of charger, in choice of the sort of back office system, and then of course in terms of how much you actually want to charge people for the energy that they're using when they charge their car. So it does need a bit more management, but you do have that flexibility and that sort of freedom. Whereas the second model, which is a sort of a third party kind of funded model, is a little bit different. So these operators, there aren't many around, but there are a couple, and I can share those if you're interested. They take on the sort of cost and risk. They will pay for the charger, and then they'll pay for the management, and they'll do all that. But they then also will take the income. Some are run commercially, so in some cases the provider will pay the owner of the bays, so yourselves, as a monthly rental, which would be sort of agreed in advance probably, but they will then take, say, the profit from the charger use. Others are run on a bit more of a kind of a community benefit basis. So there's one that's run kind of through that's funded through purchase of community shares. So people sort of, it's almost like crowdfunded, I suppose. However, with this model, although it sounds great and that it's all paid for and managed, some locations mightn't be ineligible if they don't suit that particular provider's business model. So they might have a certain type of location that they're after or that they're looking for, and they might, they might have certain ones that perhaps they think are less viable that they might want to avoid. So it's not always the case that they'll be interested in a site. And also you'll have less control of the type of charger and it's sort of the tariff that's charged, because that side of things is being run by the operator. So yeah, they're the two sort of main models, really, I think. So probably that's a sort of a good point to start from if you're thinking about taking this further, is kind of which way you might want to run it. But then, you know, I think just in terms of you know, generally where to start, and a few other things to think about probably, is to sort of go back and decide if your site is suitable. So just running through some of those points that we were thinking about earlier, you know, are there nearby amenities that will increase that sort of viability of the charger? Are there nearby homes without parking, where the residents could make use of the charger potentially? I think an important one as well is whether the location feels safe, and I'm sure that most of our community buildings and village halls do, but it's just an important one to think about, you know, if people are leaving their cars there and charging, particularly overnight as well. There's also, you know, the visibility of it, whether it's visible from sort of the public realm, or if not, you know, whether you might want to think about signs to tell people that it's there. It's also useful to have, you know, bay markings or signs to show that those bays are given over to electric vehicle users. So that's another thing you want to think about, whether you've got sort of space in your car park for that, to just give over, say, usually 2 spaces if you're looking at one charger, to sort of purely to EV users. As I said, as you can see there, another important one is checking your electricity supply is sufficient and that it can handle the EV charger, and the lights won't all go out once someone plugs the charger in. So again, a qualified electrician will be able to help you with that and be able to advise you once you've kind of got a sort of a location in mind. And again, talking again about location is obviously the closer the charger is to the power source, which is, you know, usually the building, the closer it is to the building as possible is a good thing, as it will probably save you costs in terms of groundworks and running cables and things like that. And if you can actually mount the charger to the building, then that's even better, obviously, in terms of kind of reducing that cost. As I said earlier, it's important to kind of get quotes where you can as well. Some installers can even sort of do a survey of the site and, you know, check it's all suitable before proceeding. General power of competence I mentioned, I'm sure people probably know more about that than I do, but effectively that allows local authorities, including parish councils, to charge people for the use of the energy from the electric chargers. So that's a good thing to just check that's all in order. Yeah, and I think that's probably the kind of a few kind of key points about where to start. There's a lot to think about, but I think it's it's really worth doing if you feel that there's a sort of a demand and a use case there in your area. So that's sort of a quick whiz through, or not too quick, but hopefully sort of covered some of the main points. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to have a go answering them now. If there aren't any that I can answer now, I'll obviously take those away and yeah, get back to you on them. But yeah, if you've got any questions that pop up, you know, later on that you think of, then please do drop me an email at that email address as well, and I'll be happy to answer them. And then also, yeah, any kind of post discussions, you know, anything like that you want to kind of talk to me about, you know, once you've had a chat with your committees or whatever it might be, then more than happy to help, you know, in terms of filling in the application form for our grant, or just generally to talk about EV charging. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Luke. Did you want to close the presentation and then we can kind of see everybody again?
Yeah, I'll just stop.
Really
Thank you. There we are.
Brilliant. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Claire?
Do you have I'm sure you're probably not allowed to recommend suppliers, but have you got a list of a range of suppliers so that I've got somewhere to start rather than just Googling and hoping?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you're correct. So we can't specifically recommend any, but what I can do is give you a list of suppliers who are like operating in our area,
yeah,
you know, in the sort of Cambridgeshire area. And that's all, you know, I think that's all above board because it's public, you know, information. They're all basically operators that you can find on you know, the maps like Zap Map, things like that show you where chargers are. So it's just it's sort of collated that and put that into a list. So happy to share that. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got one, please. Luke.
Hello. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, it's Peter from Duxford. Yeah, I don't know if you covered it. If you did, I missed it. But the rough total cost of putting one in. You talked about the grants. What's the total
Yeah,
cost?
it's a good question, and sorry, I missed it. Absolutely, you're right. So it does vary. So we installed a couple of chargers at some of our sheltered accommodation buildings for public use about a year ago, and they were about £8,000 per charger. So that included, in one case, some digging for like cables and things like that. The other was wall mounted, which was cheaper. So I think that was yeah, that sort of from memory was perhaps more like 7, and then the one, yeah, there wasn't a huge amount of cabling, but that sort of upped the cost a little bit. It does vary, and it will also vary on the as well as the amount of groundworks needed. It'll also vary in terms of the charger that you select as well. So the faster chargers will tend to be more expensive, not vastly, but they'll be in the region of 3,000, something like that. Again, depending on the supplier. So I would say, if you looked at around sort of 8,000 for an installation, that would probably be about the right ballpark. But I will caveat that and say that we got that around a year ago. And they were, obviously things may well have changed since then. What I can do is we've had a couple more sort of recent applicants to the grant. So I don't have the sort of at the top of my sort of at my fingertips, as it were, but I can sort of pull together some of their kind of the quotes that they submitted as well.
Please.
Yeah. And kind of just obviously not the exact quote, but just the kind of bottom line, as it were, and kind of circulate those just to give you a kind of rough ballpark figure. But yeah, it's one of those where I'd always advise kind of getting quotes and speaking to some suppliers, because it does vary from site to site, and depending on the charger that you want. We've had some applicants that have installed 7 kilowatt chargers, which are perfectly fine. They'll as I said, they'll do a charge in sort of 7-8 hours. But we've had others that have installed faster ones that are 22 kilowatts. Presumably their sort of power supply has been able to handle that, and so they've opted for a faster charger. But that has then come with a bit more of a price tag. So yeah, it does vary. So it's probably not the most helpful answer, but what I will do is I'll collate the kind of recent quotes that we've received in from applicants, and I can ping those out to everybody as well. I'll try and do that sort of later on today or tomorrow.
Thanks, Luke. That's good. Can I have, sorry, one supplementary on the grants from the district council? You said up to 5,000. So so not everybody gets 5,000. So why would I get 3 rather than 5? How does that work?
It was just, I think that was what Stephen Morden, in the case of that 3.5 that Stephen Morden applied for, they'd had money from the government and they'd had parish reserves, and they, for whatever reason, they felt that was what they wanted to apply for. But there's nothing stopping you applying for the whole 5, and indeed most other applicants do. That's the limit we've set, or we've sort of, the Constitution sets on us providing these grants at a certain level. If we kind of went for more money, which we could potentially, we'd have to kind of go through extra levels of governance, and it would be a longer process. So we felt like 5 was a good sort of medium in terms of speeding up the process and getting the money out, but also actually being a useful amount of money. But yeah, that 5's the upper end, and there's no reason why you couldn't apply for the whole 5 if you wanted to.
Thanks, Luke. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Trevor Hall here, West Wickham. We had this meeting or this presentation before, and one of the things that was brought up was from Horsey saying about commonality of supply. Before we had the domestic installation of a PV system, and it was run through Cambridge and together. Would it be possible to run something like that for supplying village halls or parish councils with this kind of facility without everybody having to do it their own way?
Themselves, yeah. It's a really good question. It's one, as you said, that we've had before, and I think this grant isn't set in stone. It can change, and I think because we've run the grant for about a year or so, and it was, I think, the first case, it was the first sort of part of our involvement with kind of EV charging as a district, and it's fairly new to us. And I think we sort of put the grant out and sort of wanted to see what the uptake was and what the interest was. And I think we have had a good amount of interest, but I also think that what you're saying is true. I think it would certainly probably be easier from perspective of people operating village halls, community buildings, if there was that kind of more widely or more universally procured sort of supply, if you like. Obviously, then that sort of brings additional kind of work for us, I suppose, and it's just making sure that we've got the capacity to kind of deliver that and resource that and run it. So I think that's definitely, we're going to probably take stock of this grant in the following financial year and see how best to proceed, I think, really. So I would say, I certainly don't want to promise anything, but I'd also say, we want to, help as much as we can. So I think it's a good idea, and one that we'd like to explore. And I also would say that alongside what we're doing in South Cambs, there will be a wider piece being done by the Combined Authority and the County Council to make use of the local EV infrastructure fund, which is a large amount of government funding that's going towards public electric vehicle charging. I believe that the intention is that the County Council will be applying to that fund next year. And so it's also, a case of kind of seeing what that involves and what that will deliver for in terms of local charging, in our area as well. And kind of, rather than wanting to duplicate that work. So I think there's a couple of strands to it, but it's a fair point. It's one that it's been one that's been raised before. So I think it's definitely one for us to kind of take away and look at in terms of what we do next around EV charging for kind of our local area.
Like the grants for Cambridge together for PVs. There's a commonality of systems and benefits in purchasing costs with discounts. Yeah,
that's it. It's the kind of the larger volume of demand, and hopefully would bring down that sort of those costs to the end user. I think that Solar Together was run by, I haven't had a massive amount of involvement with it myself, but there was a sort of council, and I think there was like an online sort of bidding sort of system and things like that. So we'd have to look into like how that could work in the context of EV charging, and sort of quite a few. I think there's a few moving parts with EV charging, because you've not just got the charger itself, you've got sort of the back office system and the maintenance side of it, and that kind of ongoing side. I'm not sure how that, once it's installed, what happens to it. I guess the homeowner is sort of responsible generally for, or the sort of operator of the building or whomever it might be, is responsible for kind of keeping it running. But it's definitely kind of a model that we could look at, I think, in this context for EV charging.
Tim, you've had your hand up to ask a question.
So I did. Yes, I did. I'm just lowering my hand. Pete D wanted to know how much these things cost. Well, we've spoken about Steeple Morden. Their total cost was 13,233 quid, but when they got all their grants, the ORCS and South Cambs, the net contribution was 3,286, and it was the parish council that paid that. So that gives you an idea of, sorry, telephone keeps going. That gives you an idea of how much it might cost. We've had two separate ones, quotes from installers, and they've come to about 10,000. But Steeple Morden have really gone the whole hog, because they got individual contractors doing each part of the contract, whereas what we were looking for was somebody to do the whole lot. And so that might give you an idea of how much you're looking at overall. But I've got a few questions myself. First of all, you need load balancing to make sure that your whole electricity supply doesn't go wrong when you get a car charging itself, or two cars charging themselves. And I don't know how we know whether we need load balancing. It seems only an electrician can tell you that. And there are all kinds of bits and pieces that get added to it. I mean, Luke mentioned the general power of competence. How on earth do you get a general power of competence? Somebody has to be designated as responsible for the whole thing. And there again, we had our parish council, and we indeed would prefer to have contactless. And it costs about £1,500 extra to go contactless, because it seems that all these apps they're very difficult for people. If you're a first-time user, getting down the app and you arrive at a car park or a charger, and you have to do all those things that Luke mentioned, and it can be very frustrating and take a very long time before you're accepted by the app and accepted for payment. Whereas if you've just got a credit card and you can wave it at the machine, that seems to us to be a much better idea. And we were hoping that the government would intervene at some stage to stop all this app nonsense. So where are we with all that, Luke?
So thanks, Tim. Yeah, I mean, just going to back what you said about the prices as well. Thank you very much for that. They're obviously more up to date than the ones I provided. I'll have another look at the ones that we've got from some other applicants as well, but they may well be around that ballpark as well. I'd also say Steeple Mordaunt, I think as you said, their costs were higher because they went with different contractors for different aspects. They also, as I mentioned, resurfaced that sort of whole area. So I think that kind of upped their costs as well, which you wouldn't probably have to do if you were, looking at an existing car parking area that was already tarmacked. But you're absolutely right, Tim. Yeah, there's a lot of there can be potentially other extras that sort of pop up. I think the load balancing side of things, that's something that you need to speak to an electrician about, absolutely, or a charge point operator or an installer. I'm certainly not an electrician, so I wouldn't want to sort of misadvise anybody on that. The app and the contactless side of things, again, it's the way that the market sort of evolved, and I would say that probably anybody that's kind of got an electric vehicle at this point, it's probably it shouldn't necessarily be this way, but they're probably used to having sort of several apps on their phone. However, it is undoubtedly preferable if they could, if all charges could be contactless. The government, I believe, in the local EV infrastructure grant, have made a condition of that grant that any charges installed as a result of the grant or that are funded by the grant should be contactless, and likewise any other charges installed for any of the other government grants, like the on-street residential charge point scheme, also need to be contactless. As far as what happens to older chargers that are already in the ground and sort of retrofitting those, I don't believe there's been any sort of moves in terms of bringing those up to kind of contactless. It does cost more. The ones that we've installed, our sort of trial chargers are contactless, and then that came with a sort of the cost of a SIM card and things like that. But it does have that benefit from the user point of view, and that sort of makes it easier for obviously new users. It's a familiar technology, isn't it, that we're all used to by now. Was that, I think, hopefully that probably doesn't answer your questions, but maybe addresses them, Tim. I don't know.
It helps. But the government grant, I mean, Steeple Mordaunt got the ORCS grant for about £7,000 in total. But they have an app-powered charging point. You were saying that the government was requiring that you should have
I think,
or what?
It is now, as far as I'm aware, but I think previously, at the point at which Steeple Mordaunt applied for that grant, it wasn't a requirement. I think it subsequently has been made one, or is forthcoming at the very least, as part of the new, certainly the new local EV infrastructure grant. And I think they've also added that requirement now to the ORCS grant as well. But I don't think that was the case when Steeple Mordaunt applied, because I think they probably applied about a year ago, if not more. So
Right, thank you.
We've got Janice next, but I suspect you're not Janice. So apologies.
I'm not identifying as Janice. Well, I am identifying as Janice Drake. My wife walked into the PC before I started the session, but rest assured, I'm John.
Thank you. Okay.
So, I'm not sure if I'm preempting something here. Are we going on to a use case, hopefully, that we can look at the benefits to the community centres of where we see the positive? We've talked a lot about the costs, and and the complications and things associated with this, but I've not heard anything yet about benefits, apart from obviously all the lovely green stuff that we all wish we could move forward 20 years and be achieving that already. But I'm looking more for a sort of a cost benefit analysis scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of the benefits, I suppose, you know, that the main one is, as you say, it's kind of reducing our carbon emissions and helping us as an area and as a society to move closer to that. You know, that's the kind of the key driver for it all, really. You know, and I suppose it depends on how, as an organisation, how much value you see in that, I suppose. But I think also there's you know, there's a slightly more tangible, I suppose, benefit in terms of, you know, that it can help local residents in terms of their EV charger journey. As I say, if you've not got any, you know, if they're sort of like Stephen Morden, case of Stephen Morden, for instance, if they've got residents that don't have much of their own private parking nearby, it can certainly encourage them to sort of look at EV cars as a next sort of choice, and also kind of support other businesses, for example, and kind of complement them and play off them. For instance, we had an application from Shepworth, I think it was, who've got, you know, a few facilities nearby to their village hall. They've got wildlife park, train station, and a couple of other things, obviously a shop and a public house. And they kind of contacted those businesses and spoke to them, and they were all quite keen on the idea of there being, you know, a public EV charger nearby, you know, and the sort of benefits that might bring to them, both in terms of like passing trade, if you like, of people needing a charge point, you know, finding it there and then thinking, right, what do we do for the next, you know, hour or whatever it is, or half an hour while we top up a car, sorry. So yeah, it's like they do complement each other, I think. You know, and there's a possibility also of a bit of revenue from you know, from running these. It again depends on how much you're paying for your own electricity, and then how much you want to then charge people to use the chargers. Obviously, you want to at least cover your costs, but whether there's a bit of room to you know, bring a little bit of money in as well. You know, again, it will depend on what you're paying, and you know, for your own electricity, and sort of striking that balance, I suppose, between yeah, making your money back at least, but then also making sure that it's an attractive proposition and people aren't sort of paying you know, over the odds, I guess, for their charge. But yeah, I think it's, you know, it's obviously, I think to me at least, the key benefit is that kind of, yeah, helping people on that journey and kind of promoting this kind of transition really to zero emissions vehicles, as we all need to be doing, you know, if we're going to meet these sort of targets that we've set for ourselves and that have been set nationally.
Okay, are there any other questions from anyone? I think this one's just popped up in the chat from Annika. The parish council has queried their ability to keep any profits from the charges. Is this an issue?
I have to come back on that one, I'm afraid. You can obviously certainly cover your costs, as I say, but I don't know about how, you know, parishes are sort of, what the kind of governance procedure is on you know, for charge. I know you obviously for kind of making profit or making money, I suppose. I know, as I say, the general power of competence is one of those things that's needed to, you know, to charge people as a parish council, at least, for using the service. But yeah, if I can take that one away, please, and then I can, you know, I can answer that yeah, on an email round to everybody, if that would help.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Were there any other questions? No, I don't think so. Okay. Oh, Claire, yeah.
I don't know how to put the hand up, sorry. Roughly how much work is there once it's all, you know, it all goes through, we've got the lovely charging points, then how much work is it for to maintain it and to look after the systems and all that? That was one of the big questions that our committee had, and whether we've got the people that have got the time and the interest and everything to do that sort of work voluntarily. Yeah,
sure, absolutely. I mean, most operators will provide a maintenance package, if you like. Yeah. So they, you know, obviously it's a paid service, but they will take on that burden and basically, you know, say for example the charger isn't working, it's got a fault or something like that. They have a system that will send a fault report to the operator, and then they will then be aware and they'll come out and fix it in terms, you know, whatever you've agreed. If you've agreed a 48-hour turnaround or something like that to get it fixed, they'll come out and fix it. You know, if you don't have that, then, you know, you're sort of looking at potentially, you know, if there is a fault, then, you know, calling up the installer to get it fixed. In terms of the sort of general, you know, that's in the worst case scenario, I suppose, of faults. If everything's running smoothly, then, you know, really it should be a case of perhaps keeping an eye on the usage of the charger, you know, checking how much it's used, whether it's you know, whether you set the right kind of tariff, so people, you know, it's whether it's kind of paying for itself, I suppose. And that's one of those things that might be, you know, you sort of look at, you know, as you go, really. You know, it's hard to say, you know, you can't look in a crystal ball and say it's going to be used this much by this time, therefore we'll have, you know, made back this amount of money. So you might want to look at, you know, your pricing structure every now and again and just make sure that it's kind of washing its own face and you're paying for your own electricity that's being used through the charger.
I noticed at Steeple Malden, they've got on their notice, they've got for any problems contact, and they've got an email address. So do different places have different levels of involvement and things going wrong then? Yeah.
I mean, it can be, it depends on exactly that, really. It depends on how much you want to be involved in the active running of it. If you don't, as I say, then, you know, there are companies that can potentially use that sort of fully funded model, and they will run the whole thing. But then, you know, you've got sort of less control over some of the you know, what it's charging people to use it, and perhaps and where it goes, that sort of thing. But yeah, if you want to own it yourself, operate it yourself, then I don't know in the case of Steeple Malden whether that email is directly to them. I would suspect not. I suspect it's probably a you know, a maintenance agreement that they've got that will then, you know, be reported on, and someone will come out and fix it, rather than it going to the parish, who then have to then make that call themselves.
I don't think people wanted to sort of trudge out to reboot the charger at midnight on a Sunday.
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, I know that some of the there's a one of these kind of fully funded ones. I think it's the sort of community one. They do actually offer training as well. So they do kind of, you know, if people want it, you know, within the sort of you know, parish council or whoever it might be, they'll kind of give that basic training on, you know, a quick reboot, you know. So yeah, like you say, if it's in the daytime and someone's not far away, they can go and, you know, open up a little hatch and press a button, and then rather than, you know, waiting 24 hours for someone to come out and fix it. But yeah, so there are sort of people out there who do offer that kind of side of it as well. But there's a lot of different options, so it's worth being aware of those, and I'm happy to kind of go through it in a bit more detail with anyone, you know, on a separate call if that's something that would be useful.
Okay, thank you.
Quite a lot to consider though, isn't it? Especially when you're a village hall or a parish councillor and you're a volunteer, and to kind of be on 24/7 call if, you know, if there is an issue. I think there's quite a lot to think through, isn't there, about the practicalities of it for people on the ground, and what's the best route to go. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, right. Now I've been taking a list of all of the things, hopefully, that Luke and I need to come back to you with. So I'll just quickly run through them, and if I've missed anything, then please, you know, shout, and we can make sure it's covered. So we need to send over the web link for South Cambs District Council's information. Obviously, we will send you a set of slides for today. We'll send you the recording so that you can share that with colleagues and with your committee members. You know, if you want to kind of express an interest in this and take it further, but make sure everybody else understands what's happened today. Obviously, I will send over Luke's contact details. We'll make sure that the government link for the funding is included in that letter. I think, Luke, you said something about a list of suppliers that you were going to pull together, possibly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. A list. Yeah, and also just
a rough quote, wasn't it?
That's it. a roundup of kind of an average of the quotes that we've got back from people who've applied to the grant. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was the question around profits for a parish council and what happens to that in terms of their accounting processes. Brilliant. Have I forgotten anything? No. Okay, so that's good. So we'll make sure Luke and I will work together and make sure that the email comes around to you in the next few days once we've gathered all of that information together. So that you'll have everything, and as I say, it's a good opportunity to share it with your you know, your parish councils and your colleagues on any village hall committees. Brilliant. Well, hopefully you found this session interesting this morning. We'll make sure, obviously Luke and I will make sure that you've got the contact details of Luke to follow up any questions after this session, because I appreciate there's quite a lot of information to take on board here and to absorb. But you know, there is the support on hand, both from ourselves and from obviously from Luke, if you do have any questions. Okay, so that just leaves me to thank Luke very much for your presentation, Luke. And I know I appreciate this is a repeat of one we did a few months ago, but I think it's clear that there is still quite a lot of interest, isn't there, and enthusiasm to certainly look at this and see how communities can take this forward. So thank you very much for your time, Luke, this morning. And thank you very much for everybody coming along and giving up your hour or so this morning to attend this session. As I said, if you've got any questions on this subject or any other subjects in terms of relating to village halls and community buildings, please do drop me a line, and my contact details will be in the letter that comes out to you following this session. So thank you very much, everybody. I will let you all go and have a well-earned cup of coffee now.